The rain had a way of making the streets smell like fresh ink, as if the city itself were still being written. I pulled my hood tighter and stepped into the familiar warmth of the corner cafe. The barista, Nora, already had my coffee ready, black with a dash of cinnamon. "Running late, Maribel?" she asked, sliding the cup toward me with a smile that made the gray morning bearable. I gave her the same answer I always did. "The bus won't leave without me." The 7:15 had been my ride for nearly 3 years, ferrying me from my apartment to the college and, most nights, to the library where I worked part-time. It was never luxurious, but it was dependable, predictable in a city that rarely offered predictability. I liked the bus's gentle rumble beneath me, the faint smell of upholstery that had held decades of passengers, the way the same faces appeared each morning like characters in a story I was still piecing together. Curtis Bowden, the driver, was one of those fixtures. Middle-aged, heavy-set, with a bristled beard that looked like it could sandwood, he had a way of glancing at passengers in the mirror without ever fully meeting their eyes. "Careful out there, Maribel," he often said, his tone caught somewhere, between a joke and a warning. That morning, I noticed him watching the sidewalk as I boarded. "Rain makes the crazies come out," he muttered when I scanned my pass. I laughed politely, slid into my usual seat near the middle, and popped in my earbuds. The soft thrum of music was my shield from the world, but it couldn't block out everything. 2 rows from the back sat a man I'd seen almost every week. Tall, with a narrow frame and skin that seemed too pale for someone in their 30s, he always wore the same dark windbreaker no matter the weather. His eyes lingered, not in a confrontational way, but with the stillness of someone memorizing details. I'd never seen him get off the bus. He would simply vanish, as if the city had swallowed him whole between roots. Near the window on the opposite side sat an unfamiliar woman. She looked about my age, but carried herself differently, her spine perfectly straight, gaze fixed not on her phone or the passing streets, but on the glass itself, as if studying the reflections there. At one point, I caught her watching mine. Our eyes didn't meet directly, but in the surface of the window, her face hovered behind me like a half-formed thought. The day unfolded without incident. Lectures, a group project in the library basement, a lunch too bland to remember. By the time my shift ended at the library, the rain had deepened into something steadier, a quiet percussion against the roof as I locked up. The streets glistened like wet slate, the lamps pooling amber light over puddles. The late bus was always quieter, and I told myself it would be fine. Curtis was there again, his greeting shorter this time. "Evening," he said, his eyes briefly scanning the empty street behind me before the doors shut. The man in the windbreaker was already in his spot. The unfamiliar woman was there too, seated in almost the same place as in the morning. I sat near the front this time, telling myself it was because I was tired, not because the atmosphere felt different. The rhythmic sway of the bus, the dim light overhead, the faint hum of tires over wet pavement, all of it worked against my determination to stay alert. My head drifted toward the glass, the city smearing into a watercolor of light and shadow. The Sabab woman's reflection appeared again, faint but steady. She wasn't looking at her phone, or the street, or Curtis at the wheel. She was watching me, not with hostility, but with the unsettling focus of someone reading a language only they understood. My hand tightened around my bag strap. I reminded myself that people stare for all kinds of reasons. Some don't even realize they're doing it. The rain lulled me, the warmth inside wrapping around me like a blanket. I told myself I'd close my eyes for just a second, that I'd wake at my usual stop. My breathing slowed, the music fading into the rhythm of the road. Somewhere between one streetlight and the next, the city slipped away. When I opened my eyes, I felt it immediately, that subtle shift when you realize the script has changed. The bus was almost empty. Curtis sat rigid at the wheel. The man, In the windbreaker was still there, but closer now, just 2 rows back. The woman remained, her gaze fixed on me through the reflection. Outside, the streets looked wrong. Buildings I didn't recognize, storefronts with windows covered in plywood, street lamps flickering like they were tired of trying. I sat up, straighter, my pulse quickening. "This isn't my stop," I said toward Curtis, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. "Almost the end of the line," he replied without turning his head. The woman shifted forward in her seat. Her reflection tilted toward mine, lips barely moving as she whispered words I couldn't hear over the hum of the engine. My music had stopped, though I didn't remember pulling out my phone. The rain outside had grown heavier, blurring the world beyond the glass. I glanced over my shoulder. The man in the windbreaker's eyes met mine for the first time, and he didn't look away. Curtis slowed the bus, steering it down a street even darker than the last. The air inside felt heavier now, the kind that presses against your ribs. The woman's whisper finally reached me. "You shouldn't be here." Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but it threaded through me like a chill. My fingers curled around the edge of my seat. The bus rolled forward into the darkness, and for the first time in years, I wasn't sure where it would stop. The bus hissed to a stop at an intersection swallowed in shadow. My body swayed with the movement, and I braced against the seat in front of me. Outside, the street stretched in both directions like an unlit corridor, each building a silhouette against the wet sky. Curtis didn't announce the stop. He simply shifted into gear again, the engine groaning as we rolled deeper into a part of the city I'd never seen. I swallowed, my throat dry despite the damp air. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, loud enough to carry over the hum of the bus. Curtis's eyes flicked to the mirror and back to the road. "Almost the end," he repeated, his tone flat, rehearsed, as if he'd been saying it all night. The woman behind me leaned forward until I could see her reflection again. "You should get off before that," she murmured. The sound of her voice, low and deliberate, didn't match her delicate posture. It was the voice of someone who had already measured the dangers ahead. The man in the windbreaker had moved closer without me noticing. Now only 1 row separated us, his knees angled slightly toward the aisle, his hands resting on the seat, in front of him. There was no malice in his face, but there was intent, like a chess player moving a piece toward checkmate. I considered pulling the cord, forcing the bus to stop, but the thought of stepping out into that unfamiliar darkness made my stomach knot. "What's at the end of the line?" I asked the woman, my voice low but urgent. Her gaze held mine in the glass. "A place you don't want to see twice." The answer did nothing to steady me. My phone was still in my pocket, but when I slid it out, the signal bars were gone, replaced with a hollow "no service" that felt like a verdict. The bus took a sharp left, tires splashing through standing water. I clutched the seat beside me, watching unfamiliar street signs pass, most of them so faded they were unreadable. Curtis's posture had changed. His shoulders were squared, his grip on the wheel too tight for a casual late-night drive. Every so often, his eyes darted to the mirror, checking the 3 of us without a word. The woman leaned closer, her whisper almost blending with the hiss of the rain. "When it stops, don't argue, just move." I turned slightly, trying to read her expression. Her eyes were steady, calm, like she'd been through this before. The thought unsettled me more than the man's silent presence. The road narrowed until the bus's headlights barely cut through the wet dark ahead. My heartbeat synced with the wipers scraping across the glass. Then, without warning, the bus slowed again, coasting into what looked like an industrial block. The air outside was heavy with the smell of oil and metal. Curtis eased the bus against the curb, the brakes sighing like a weary breath. "Last stop," he said, his voice void of warmth. The doors opened with their usual mechanical groan, but no one moved. The rain drummed harder on the roof, each drop a reminder that there was no turning back. I stood, gripping the overhead bar for balance. The man in the windbreaker rose too, keeping a few steps behind me. The woman followed at my side, close enough that I could feel the heat of her presence. The street outside was empty, the warehouses looming like watchful sentinels. The glow from the bus's interior lights spilled onto the wet pavement, a fragile island in the darkness. I hesitated at the threshold, my mind torn between stepping out into the unknown and retreating into the hollow safety of my seat. The woman gave me a slight push forward. "Trust me," she said under her breath. We stepped into the rain together. The cold bit instantly through my jacket, the water clinging to my hair. Behind us, the man descended slowly, his shoes splashing in the shallow puddles. Curtis stayed in his seat, his hands still gripping the wheel, eyes fixed on something far ahead. The doors closed with a metallic snap. The bus lingered for a heartbeat, then pulled away, its taillights shrinking into the mist until they vanished entirely. The sudden silence pressed in around us, broken only by the rain and the distant hum of a generator. I turned to the woman. "Who are you?" She glanced toward the shadowed alley to our right. "Harper," she said, as if offering a name was all the explanation I needed. Her eyes flicked over my shoulder toward the man who had stopped a few paces back. The stillness in his face didn't change, but I felt the pressure of his gaze like a weight between my shoulder blades. Harper stepped closer to me, her voice barely audible over the rain. "We need to move before he decides to." I didn't know whether to fear the man or the place we'd just entered. The warehouses seemed to lean toward us, their walls streaked with rust, their windows blind with grime. Somewhere deep inside one of them, a metallic clang echoed and then faded, leaving only the rain once more. My breath came quicker, my chest tightening as Harper guided me toward the alley. The pavement here was slick, littered with scraps of cardboard and the smell of something sour. I could hear the man's footsteps behind us, slow, measured, never hurrying but never falling away. "Why me?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to control it. "Wrong night, wrong bus," Harper replied. She didn't look back. We reached the end of the alley where a single streetlight buzzed overhead. Its weak glow revealed another road. Beyond, just as empty as the last, but at least it seemed to stretch toward something more than steel and shadow. Harper paused, glancing behind us. The man had stopped just inside the mouth of the alley, his hands still at his sides, his face unreadable. For a moment, none of us moved, the rain pooling in our silence. Then Harper nudged me forward again. "Keep walking," she said. "It's not far." I wanted to believe her, but my every instinct told me that distance, no matter how small, could stretch endlessly if the wrong person was following. Still, I matched her pace, the cold water soaking through my shoes, the sound of our steps merging with the steady percussion of the rain. When we turned the next corner, a faint light flickered ahead. It could have been a shop, a house, or something else entirely. I didn't care. All I knew was that it looked like a destination, and right now any destination was better than here. But before we reached it, the low rumble of an engine stirred the air behind us. The rumble deepened, vibrating through the wet pavement beneath my shoes. Harper froze mid-step, her head tilting slightly as if she could identify the engine by sound alone. The rain ran in rivulets down her face, but she didn't move to wipe it away. I followed her gaze back the way we'd come. A white van emerged from the darkness, its headlights flaring against the rain-slicked walls of the buildings. The light burned into my eyes until I had to look away. Harper's hand found my arm, a quick, firm grip that communicated urgency without words. She pulled me toward the narrow strip between two warehouses, the path choked with trash bins and warped wooden pallets. We ducked into the gap, the smell of damp cardboard and oil enveloping us. The engine grew louder, the van slowing. I pressed my back against the rough brick, my breath shallow. Through a sliver of space, I saw the van roll past, its taillights glowing red before it stopped just beyond the mouth of the alley. Harper leaned close, her whisper a sharp thread in the rain. "They'll look on foot. We need to move before they split up." "Who?" The word barely left my lips. She didn't answer, only slipped deeper into the passage, her steps soundless despite the slick ground. I followed, my heart pounding in my ears. We emerged into a rear lot littered with rusting machinery, the kind of space that felt abandoned until you noticed the fresh tire tracks in the mud. "We're not safe here," Harper said, scanning the shadows. Her focus never wavered, as if she expected danger to materialize at any moment. "There's a street 2 blocks north. If we can get there, I can—" She stopped abruptly, eyes narrowing toward the far corner of the lot. The man from the bus stood there, half hidden, by the curve of a metal container. He wasn't running toward us, just watching, the same unreadable expression fixed to his face. I took a step back. "He followed us." "He was meant to," Harper said grimly. "It keeps you looking at him instead of—" The sentence was cut off by the sound of a door slamming. I spun toward the noise. 2 figures stepped from the open side of the nearest warehouse, their shapes blurred by the rain, but their movements unmistakably deliberate. One was tall and broad, the other leaner, but both moved with the confidence of people who belonged here. Harper grabbed my wrist. "Go!" We darted toward the far side of the lot, splashing through shallow pools of water. My legs burned, the cold biting through my jeans, but I didn't dare slow. Behind us, footsteps joined the rain, steady and unhurried, as if they knew there was nowhere we could run that they couldn't follow. A chain-link fence blocked our path, its top lined with twisted metal where the barbs had been cut away. Harper scaled it quickly, her fingers hooking into the slick steel with practiced ease. I hesitated, glancing over my shoulder. Too long. The leaner figure was already halfway across the lot. "Climb!" Harper hissed. I scrambled up, my wet hands slipping on the metal until she reached down and pulled me the last few inches. We dropped into another narrow street, this one lined with shuttered garages. The air smelled faintly of gasoline. Harper led us toward the faint light I'd seen earlier. It grew brighter now, resolving into the flicker of a fluorescent bulb above a metal door. She slowed as we approached, her eyes scanning the rooftops and corners before she knocked. 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. A lock clicked, and the door opened just enough for a sliver of warm air to spill out. A man with close-cropped hair and deep lines around his mouth peered at us. "Harper," he said, his voice low, "you're not supposed to be here tonight." "They moved early," Harper replied. "We need a place to hold for 10 minutes. His gaze flicked to me, lingering long enough to make my skin prickle, but he stepped aside. Inside. Quickly. The room beyond was small, cluttered with metal shelving stacked with unmarked boxes. The hum of the fluorescent light overhead mingled with the steady patter of rain on the thin roof. Harper closed the door behind us, throwing the bolt into place. I leaned against a shelf, my breath still ragged. "What is this? Who are those people?" Harper crouched to pull something from a box. A handheld radio, battered but functional. The short version? People who pick up strays off the wrong bus route. People who don't make it back. She handed me a bottle of water from another shelf. "You almost became one of them tonight." The reality in her voice left no room for doubt, but my mind still resisted the shape of it. "Curtis?" I asked. "The driver?" Her eyes darkened. He's part of it. Always has been. A faint sound outside made her stand sharply. The man who'd let us in moved to the door, pressing his ear to the metal. "They're here," he said quietly. Harper's gaze locked on me, her tone turning clipped. "If they get in, you run. Don't stop, don't argue. Just find somewhere, with light and people." The pounding on the door began, measured, deliberate, like a clock ticking down. The man reached for something beneath the counter, but Harper shook her head. "They won't push hard yet. They're testing." The pounding stopped. Silence swelled, heavy and unnatural. I glanced at the window, a narrow pane high on the wall, and saw movement, a shadow sliding past, then another. "They're circling," Harper murmured. The radio crackled to life in her hand, a burst of static followed by a clipped male voice. "2 blocks south, 10 minutes. Relief flickered across her face. She turned to the man. "Hold them off. We'll make the jump." Without waiting for his reply, she unbolted a side door I hadn't noticed, pushing it open to reveal a narrow service alley. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it the distant wail of a siren. Harper motioned for me to follow, her steps quick but controlled. The alley fed into a wider street, the glow of a traffic light visible at the far end. Somewhere beyond it, I could hear cars. Real, living city traffic. But between us and that, sound lay the stretch of darkness we had to cross. "Stay close," Harper said. "They won't risk being seen, but they'll try to cut us off." I nodded, forcing my feet to move despite the weight in my legs. Every shadow seemed to twitch, every corner to hold a shape just out of sight. The siren's cry grew sharper. Now and with it came the faintest thread of hope. Then from behind us, the low growl of the van's engine rolled into the street. The van's headlights cut through the darkness, bleaching the wet asphalt in blinding white. Harper's hand clamped around my arm, pulling me toward the traffic light at the far end of the street. My breath came in sharp bursts, each one clouding, in the cold night air. The engine behind us roared, tires hissing over the slick pavement. "They're trying to hurt us," Harper said without looking back. Her voice was steady, but her grip tightened with each step. The glow of the traffic light grew larger, its green halo promising a way out, but the van closed the distance with predatory precision. I could feel the vibrations in the soles of my shoes. Then, from the opposite corner, a patrol car appeared, its lights flaring red and blue through the rain. The siren's wail pierced the air, scattering the rhythm of my heartbeat. The van slowed but didn't stop, coasting along the curb as if pretending it had no stake in the chase. Harper angled us toward the patrol car. The officer inside, a tall man with dark hair pulled tight against his head, stepped out, hand resting on his holster. "Everything all right here?" he called over the rain. "They've been following us," Harper said, her words clipped, but precise. She jerked her chin toward the van. "They're not going to stop unless you make them." The officer's gaze shifted to the vehicle, his expression sharpening. He spoke into the radio clipped to his shoulder, and within moments, another patrol car slid into the street from the opposite end, boxing the van in. The driver, Curtis, sat behind the wheel, his face expressionless in the glare of the police lights. Beside him, the pale man from the bus leaned forward slightly, watching as if this were a scene he'd seen play out before. The officers moved quickly, one at each door, their commands firm and practiced. Curtis complied with sluggish motions. Stepping out into the rain, his shoulders hunched. The pale man followed, his hands raised, the same detached calm on his face. I stood rooted to the spot, the tension in my body refusing to release. Harper stayed close, her eyes locked on the two men as they were led to the second patrol car. "It's not over," she murmured, more to herself than to me. One of the officers approached us, his voice softer now. "You're safe. Do you need medical attention? I shook my head, though my hands were trembling. I just want to go home. He nodded, then gestured toward the car. We'll take you there. But first, we'll need your statement. The ride to the station blurred into fragments. The hum of the heater against my soaked clothes, the smell of damp upholstery, Harper's quiet presence beside me. She spoke only when necessary, answering the officer's questions with careful, measured details. Inside the station, I sat at a metal table, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. An officer with kind eyes asked me to recount everything from the moment I boarded the late bus. As I spoke, the events took on a strange, distant quality, as though I were describing something that had happened to someone else. Harper was in another room, her voice low but steady through the thin walls. I caught only fragments, mentions, of patterns, routes, and disappearances. When the questioning ended, an officer offered me a blanket and a cup of something hot. The warmth seeped into my fingers, but it didn't reach the tightness in my chest. I stared at the steam curling upward and tried not to imagine how the night could have ended if I hadn't woken up in time, or if Harper hadn't been there. She emerged from the other room an hour later, her coat zipped high, hair still damp. "They've got enough to dig deeper," she said quietly as she approached. "But don't expect it to hit the news tomorrow." I frowned. "Why not? They arrested them." "Arrests are easy," she replied. "Proving everything? That takes time, and these people are careful." A wave of fatigue rolled over me. "So what now?" "Now you go home," Harper said. "You stay alert, and you never take that route again." Her words carried a finality that left no space for argument. She offered me a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, before turning to speak with another officer. When they finally let me leave, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the glow of the street lamps, quiet and deceptively peaceful. An officer offered me a ride, and I accepted, the city passing in muted colors beyond the window. At my apartment door, I hesitated before stepping inside. The familiar smell of coffee and old books greeted me, but the comfort I expected didn't come. I set my bag down and went straight to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see the street below. Empty. Still, my eyes searched the shadows as if expecting a pale face or the glint of headlights. I sat on the edge of my bed, the events replaying in fragments. The reflection of Harper's face in the bus window, Curtis's voice saying, "Last stop," the van's engine, rumbling closer, each piece slotted into place like a puzzle I didn't want to finish. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was shallow and restless, broken by the echo of Harper's warning, "You never take that route again." The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds, soft and warm. It should have felt like a new day, a fresh start. But when I glanced at the bus schedule pinned to my wall, my eyes went straight to the 7:15 and the late-night return. My hand hovered over it for a moment before I tore the paper down and dropped it in the trash. From that night forward, I never boarded a bus without knowing exactly who was behind the wheel and exactly who was sitting behind me.